Hmm. Ah.
To members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, temples are sacred, the most sacred places we have on earth. Because some of our holiest ordinances take place in these buildings, Latter-day Saints revere them and would be devastated at the thought of one of them going up in flames. And unfortunately, that's happened. Thankfully, only twice has a temple actually been destroyed by fire, though there have been a few other close calls over the years. But you may have heard the tale of a temple that was consumed in a spiritual fire, so that if you were looking at it, you'd swear the building was burning down, but the flames are actually a miraculous vision from heaven. Growing up near St. Louis, Missouri, I've heard this particular story quite a bit in casual conversation and in Sunday school, even shared over the pulpit. There are a few different versions of the story, but this is my favorite. It was the night of June 1st, 1997, the first of several dedication sessions at the newly finished St. Louis, Missouri temple. A dedicatory prayer had been given, the ritual of the Hosanna shout was conducted, and, as is tradition, a choir began to sing the hymn, "The Spirit of God." Now, the temple sits right alongside a major highway with trucks and cars speeding past every second. A traveler would be pretty hard-pressed to miss this towering white church with a golden statue on top, especially since it was so well lit against the evening sky. In fact, it looked like it was shining, it was gleaming, it was... Wait a minute, was it actually on fire? At the very moment that the choir sang, "The Spirit of God like a fire is burning," the roof was set ablaze, burning hot with yellow tongues of flame lapping up against the spire. At least one passerby on the highway was shocked enough to call the fire department. Several fire trucks were dispatched, and with lights flashing and sirens wailing, they rushed to the scene and roared to a halt right at the front entrance. Just as the first responders were about to storm in, they were met by a gentle old man at the door. President Gordon B. Hinckley, who was there for the dedication, coolly raised his hands and explained that this was no real fire. It was a spiritual flame, the power of God descending upon his house, and that there was no real need for fear. And then, with a twinkle in his eye, the prophet turned around and strolled back into the burning building. Anyway, that's the way I've heard it. If you're from this neck of the woods, you've probably heard the tale before, or some variation of it. Sometimes it's the temple president instead of the prophet, or the 911 call was made from an old car phone, little details like that. I've even heard people claim that it was some other temple instead of St. Louis, but the core ideas of the narrative always seem to stay the same. And this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. There are at least two other similar events recorded in church history, one in Kirtland and one in Nauvoo. You may have heard that in 1836, when the Kirtland Temple was dedicated, there were all kinds of miracles, both inside and out, people speaking in tongues and prophesying, and visions and angels descending from heaven. There are journal entries describing some of the most glorious events in church history. And when the townspeople heard what was described as the sound of rushing wind coming from inside the temple, they gathered around and saw a bright light like a pillar of fire resting upon the temple. This lasted well into the night. It may be interesting to note that W. W. Phelps wrote the hymn, "The Spirit of God," specifically to be sung that day. As for Nauvoo, we already know that the original Nauvoo temple has had its share of fire damage, like real fire damage. Once during its construction, when an overheated stovepipe set the roof ablaze, and then, of course, when the whole building was burned down by arsonists in 1848. But I'm not talking about those events. I'm talking about the night a few weeks after that stovepipe fire, when the temple was once again seen going up in flames, but this time it was different.
16 March 1846. Last night, Chester Loveland was called out of bed by his mother-in-law, stating that the temple was again on fire. He dressed as quick as lightning and ran out of doors and saw the temple all in a blaze. He studied a few seconds, and as it did not appear to consume any, and as there was no others running, he was satisfied it was the glory of God, and again went to bed. Another brother saw the belfry all on a fire at 9:45. He ran as hard as he could, but when he came to the temple, he found all dark and secure. Thus was the Spirit, power, and glory to God manifest.
And in the scriptures, we can find even more accounts of sacred places being filled with glorious bursts of light or flames that don't seem to burn anything up. So there's some precedent in the church's first two temples, but did something like this actually happen again in 1997? Surely something happened. It's rare for this sort of hearsay to get spread without some seed of truth. I've scoured the chat rooms and the blogs, and everybody seems to have their own opinion on the matter, but I'm after the facts, so I needed to talk to this man.
Joey has this fancy
That good?
stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
Got to balance it or anything?
Yeah, that's good.
You will edit this and take out all
I
that.
will heavily edit everything. Yeah,
I found perhaps the most qualified person on earth to talk about the St. Louis Temple fire. Because of his profession, we've agreed not to mention his full name.
Well, I mean, I could say my name is Lon, and I was a part of the first maintenance crew of the St. Louis Temple.
Lon has had a career as a high-level engineer at a few different temples, including St. Louis, and he still works for the church and building operations, so plumbing, electricity, that sort of thing.
I was there that night.
I'll just let Lon tell the story from his unique insider perspective.
So I was standing right next to the security supervisor. At the time, he got a call from the people that were helping run the open house and dedication, stating that the fire department was at the temple gates, not the front entrance, but the gates, and that someone had reported that the St. Louis Temple had flames coming out of the top. The supervisor and I, of course, wanted to verify that. You take those things serious. You never just blow it off. We stepped out of the service entrance and we looked up at the building from the highway side and saw nothing that would substantiate flames and fire. So I called an associate of mine and said, hey, let's go check out the roof, the mechanical rooms, and see what we can verify or not. So we walked through the mechanical areas. We went up through the roof hatch, up onto the roof, and saw no flames.
Wait, so you actually went on the roof?
Yes, went on the roof and verified no flames. But on the way down, we did pass through some of the areas of the temple and did verify that the hymn, Spirit of God Like a Fire is Burning, was being practiced by one of the choirs.
Okay.
And I don't know. There could be a connection there if you want to make one. I don't know.
Now, Lon, is there any kind of practical, non-spiritual way to explain this? Maybe the lighting or something looked like a fire?
That could be. Now, the cooling towers for the chillers were located on the west side between the highway and the building.
Okay.
And at certain times, if their fans were in high speed, you could get quite a mist that would blow up into the air, as far as 40 feet even. And the highway being down a little lower, and the way the lights shine, you could maybe perceive that it would appear like a fire.
I later looked up the historical records for that night's weather conditions. It was pretty warm and muggy. Just visit Missouri in June and you'll know what I mean. And these were brand new air conditioning systems. They were working very hard to keep the building cool. Now, I'm not an engineer or a meteorologist, so maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that it's at least conceivable that the conditions were just right for a plume of steam or mist to come out of those cooling towers and obscure the view of the temple from the highway. And, those lights have a slight amberish tone to it, so to somebody speeding by on the highway out of the corner of their eye, maybe they could have mistaken that for flames. Lon went on to confirm that it was indeed a driver on the highway that made the emergency call, and yes, a fire truck did show up on the scene in response to that call, but it didn't go past the front gate, which is pretty far from the building itself. But as we kept talking, Lon dropped this little detail on me.
Now, I don't know if this is news, but there was a second call. And interestingly enough, the first call was the first day of dedication. The second call was the last day of dedication.
Oh, really? Really?
I pieced that together in my mind, just thinking, oh, okay. By then, the response from the fire department was quite a bit different. It was more, I think, just a phone call instead of showing up. Then we were wondering, okay, why is this happening? And we were looking at the cooling towers as a potential theory. To me, it's interesting that it was the first and last day.
Was there something there at that dedication? Yes, it definitely seemed like a fire to at least 2 people driving on separate occasions. It was convincing enough for them to want to call the authorities and put it out. Now, was there a huge scene with dozens of fire trucks and the prophet showing up at the door just to baffle the firefighters? Certainly not. There were no news reports about the incident, and by all accounts, the fire truck showing up was only a precaution. Matter of fact, as I'm just finishing up this video, I got a message from my brother Ben, who was recently employed as a groundskeeper at the St. Louis Temple. As he went inside the building for an endowment session, he got to speak to one of the people who currently run the building facilities. And from the sound of it, there may be another explanation for this gleaming manifestation.
Just bumped into the head engineer who I used to work with, and he said in all the years he's worked here, he's gotten so many rumors and stories and reports of people thinking the temple was just up in flames because apparently we have a giant exhaust valve right on top of the temple that sometimes can look like smoke. And so not only would the water vapor thing might have caused the rumor, but also just frequently people think that the temple's on fire because of the exhaust system up top.
So it sounds like this myth can be explained by a combination of a few quirks of the ventilation and lighting systems, and by the fact that the building itself is situated so visibly to so many drivers. As for me, I've passed by the St. Louis Temple countless times. I've never seen this fire phenomenon, but who am I to say what these people saw? Was it a simple trick of the light, a foggy illusion, or did the Spirit of God, like a burning fire, rest upon the Lord's holy house?
I tend not to sensationalize things. I'm more realistic, at least always thought I have been. I don't know. We didn't see any flames, but I'm not going to say anybody else didn't see what they perceived to be flames. Mm-hmm. Some people have eyes to see and some don't. I wouldn't discredit that either.
I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I just want to make sure that the facts are out there so that when you tell the story, you can tell it the way that it actually happened instead of, blowing smoke. Faith-promoting rumors tend to spread like wildfire in the church, and I've been collecting these latter-day urban legends for years now. There is quite a list. Some of them are true, some of them are completely made up. Maybe you've got one that I've never heard before. Let me know.